Okay, today we're going to talk about the TAO of flight anxiety. Just kind of explore a case study of the dynamics of what happened during an on-flight incident where a woman got anxious about flying and also lashed out at a stewardess. So it was kind of an anxiety aggression episode. And so I kind of want to break down what could be happening there from a Taoist perspective, given what assumptions it has about human nature and how to deal with problems and unwanted emotions, and how to move through those things. So first is the framing of the problem. We're talking about causation and correction here. But let's first talk about framing of the problem. We want to start out on the right foot, because if we frame it wrong, we're going to be resisting a situation that we're actually creating. So that's another element of the TAO. It seems counterintuitive, but it says it's a paradox. So we don't want to go into this situation saying, I don't want to be anxious on this flight. That's another way of resisting something and energizing it. So we want to have an idea of what we're moving toward. So a peaceful flight. So here's a symbol of a peaceful flight. That's what we're moving toward. This is not something that we're strongly moving against. This is something we're trying to avoid, but we're and move through. But you don't want to approach a flight, having I don't want to feel this in mind. Okay, so let's talk about the case study, for example, or for 1 second. So I don't know the situation intimately enough, the person involved intimately enough to say that exactly what was going on. I'm going to put myself into the situation and kind of project different potential fears involved. So and what she was doing. So I start out. I know that I have had past incidents of discomfort flying. I know that, and I maybe I've seen 9/11 pictures or plane crash pictures, and I start to have a fear of death. I feel out of control on this airplane when I get on this airplane. So that's, before we even start, that's the causation. That's an important element before we get to any kind of aggression act. Your initial response, your initial approach to that fear is one way of intervening yourself before anybody else has to intervene you. So the intuitive thing is to say, well, I'm afraid and I don't want to be afraid. It's almost natural. I would say impulsive. It's not necessarily intuitive, but no one likes to feel. Fear is not uncomfortable, or is not a comfortable thing, and we don't want to feel it. But a lot of research is showing, and the Tao pointed out 2,500 years ago, that the best way to act in this situation is not to follow that initial impulse. It talks about paradox. So I know Stephen Hayes did research on internet pornography, where the stronger the aversion to the pornography was, the more the addiction, the more the obsession. So that talks about that's an empirical example of that kind of paradox at work in human behavior. It seems counterintuitive. It seems like, well, the more if I don't want something, I should try to push it away, try to push it out. But if you look at nature, if you look at things don't necessarily work that way. So, but there's also another element here that is an implicit assumption here. But it also is an error too. Is I am afraid. You're automatically identifying with an emotion. There's a difference, and it's just as empirically valid as saying I'm feeling fear. Fear has entered my system. But as far as recovery from that, and correction out of that. If you identify with the fear, then you're grounding yourself. You're grounding your identity in that fear, and what can you do at that point? It's hard to eliminate yourself. Right? Those initial awareness, those initial cognitions. I am afraid. I do not want to be afraid. That, I think, will increase anxiety, and if that person in an anxious state is intervened in some way, or someone gets in front of them, then that can turn into aggression. Now, the counterintuitive, the paradoxical response, is to not identify it, be aware of it, but not identify it. So this is an element of mindfulness here. And I added a little comedy. I don't want to detract from the value of the intervention, but so fear has entered my system. This is the first step. So instead of I am afraid, the person codes it. You feel something coming over you, and this could be as a result of past conditioning, or I mean, if it is a legitimate fear, you don't want to block that either. I mean, if somebody is going to bomb the plane, which is not very likely, but you don't want to tune out that natural fear. There's that good fear, but most fear is wasteful. So you first recognize fear has entered my system, and so you don't avoid it, you don't resist it. Hello, fear. Fear, welcome. All right. So you add elements of humor, but you also add awareness to it. So there's another element of humor here. Are you sure you do not want any more tea fear? You're no longer identifying with it, and the narrative implies a kind of acceptance, and then you even imply you're welcome. You want to go? No, stay longer if you want. I'm not pushing you out. So that kind of relationship to one's own emotion, that kind of disposition, that could be a Taoist approach. There can be many Taoist approaches, but when you collate all the approaches to emotion that the Tao recommends, this is one of the many. So what this is going to feel like is when you're kind of making that transition, that's going to feel odd at first. I am going to welcome in something I don't want. That's going to feel really uncomfortable, and it's the pain of change almost. So there's going to be temporary discomfort initially. It's going to go down, and increasingly as you get more and more used to understanding how to move out of fear, you're going to stop that entire anxiety aggression process entirely. It's a gradual curve downward. So let's discuss the different phrases from the Tao and how I interpret it in order to get to this solution, but also describe why this problem happened. So the first is yield to overcome, bend and be straight, and this is from the Tao. So I used a picture of Neo from the Matrix. So in a scene, Neo's getting shot at, and he's contorting his body every way, but he's not resisting. It's very, but he's yielding, but he's not allowing himself to be a doormat. Because sometimes in this culture, like giving up or yielding seems like, okay, you let yourself get run over. But this is yield to overcome. It's an important addendum to the yielding. And bend and be straight. So you're bending in order to be straight. That's another element of paradox that the Tao integrates again and again. And so this is a visual, and that's how you cope. One way you can cope with the problem, and it illustrates the paradox. And I used another element to illustrate this part. It's very similar themes here. So this is a modern example of a engineering designed for earthquake-proof buildings. So in this example, like the earthquake would be the fear. That's something that we don't want. But if you resist it rigidly, the paradox is the building's going to fall down. And this quote is, "The hard and stiff will be broken, and the soft and supple will prevail." And what this means is, I mean, it's not the building is soft or spongy, but the foundations have these rubber bearings on them. And what it does is it bends, it goes, it rides the storm out, right? It goes with the earthquake. It doesn't ride it out to the point where you fall over, but the stiff building, it resists it, right? And then it crumbles, right? The hard and stiff will be broken. So the flexible in this case is strong, and the strong is weak. The rigid is weak, and that's another paradox. I mean, it plays out in life all the time, but it also plays out internally. So the Christ said, the internal reflects the external. Another intervention is stop thinking and end your problems. Let your heart be at peace. So this is a little bit more advanced, but it goes along with the same things. If you can drop all cognition in that situation, that's another practice of mindfulness. If you can drop all cognition, there's going to be no fear. Whoever can see through all fear will always be safe. So if you're seeing through it, you're not becoming the fear. If you're seeing through it, you're understanding how it's working in it, and you're getting past it. The path forward seems backward. So this is a python snake, and if you're getting bit by a python snake, it's designed to deepen your problem as you pull away from it. So if you pull your hand straight out of the python's mouth, then you're going to get stuck. Right? If you push in though and then come out, that's how you get out of it. So it illustrates the paradox, and if you have that visual in mind while you're going through that anxiety aggression cycle, you're going to avoid it. The path forward seems backwards. So this is another image reminder of, you're going to have an old habit of feeling fear, and then I am afraid, and then I don't want that. But then you're going to remember the path forward seems backwards, so you're going to say, okay, well, what seems like the wrong thing, I'm going to do this. So I don't want to feel it. Okay, I'll welcome it, and then you'll move through it. Be like nature. When the wind blows, let it blow. When it rains, let it rain. When the storm passes, the sun shines through. So this is another saying that says, don't resist what's inside you, and when you don't resist it, you don't create internal conflict, and it'll move through you. He's just using nature to illustrate internal self-management principles, because he didn't have the language to necessarily articulate, and maybe this is a better way of articulating it that everybody understands and knows. So another, maybe it's a side note. These are helpful guides, helpful cognitions to kind of move through that anxiety situation. But another way that you can imagine the woman, or if it's somebody that will say, well, this is a 3-hour-long flight. I don't know how I'm going to keep myself together for that long. And so you could say, this is a great task for you, but do it one step at a time, right? One foot in front of another. So that just seems like a natural way of helping that person out. But what it's doing is you're trying to tell her mind to focus on one thing at a time, and because the overwhelm is going to create anxiety, and the anxiety can create like backlashes and aggression. So you compartmentalize the mind one step at a time, one step at a time, one step at a time, and then you can give your attention to each step, and you move through it. And so what these all come together is ways of managing your own internal states in a very efficient way, in order to move through things that we don't want more quickly, to make those instances fewer and fewer, because the more that we practice this is universal. The more we can yield to overcome and be straight, the more mentally healthy we can be in every way. So these principles will come into play again and again anywhere in life. So I guess this is it's a little bit different than mindfulness. The Tao uses more imagery. I think mindfulness can be a little abstract sometimes. This is gets a little bit more specific, and I'm much more a fan of it as an intervention. But I'll talk about much more different ways to intervene here, to teach this, and also experiment with this in future posts. Thanks.